It's so dependent on aid from other countries, especially from the United States. So this start was a good one for Volodymyr Zelenskyy, as he really already touched again the hearts of the Americans. And this will be crucial during his visit, because he has to convince those who are becoming more and more critical about him and about all the billions of dollars which are given to Ukraine.
He knows how to move on the big stage, doesn't he? He was an actor in his previous life, after all. How symbolic is this trip, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, it really is very symbolic. I mean, we're almost to the day, sort of 10 months into this war. And I mean, if we'd been sitting here 10 months ago when that invasion began, the scale of it and the this existential threat that reared its head against Ukraine, the thought that, you know, we would be sitting here now and Zelenskyy would be kind of welcomed in Washington as a kind of wartime hero, which is the kind of reception that he's getting, at least from a very significant chunk of kind of the DC political firmament, that really is quite something. And although he's kind of sort of toured the world already this year in a virtual sense, he's made addresses to the US Congress and many other parliaments, the Bundestag here in Germany, to get his message across, to really kind of beat the drum for support for Ukraine. Still, it is quite remarkable that he's made it to Washington today, and also for this trip to happen just a day after he went to the very front line of the current front line of the fighting at the moment, the city of Bakhmut, and even bringing back a medal from one of the fighters there to give to Joe Biden. So yeah, a really deeply symbolic visit, but also, you know, a politically important one for him. He wants to get commitments for continuing support from the Americans. Without the military support from the Americans, the Ukrainians would face almost certain defeat in this war against Russia. So he needs to keep investing in this relationship with the United States to keep Ukraine with a fighting chance.
Today, the U.S. rolled out the red carpet for Volodymyr Zelenskyy. How is all of this going down in Russia?
Well, I think, I mean, it's been quite interesting to see recently that Vladimir Putin has not been communicating in his normal way quite with the Russian public. For instance, there's usually an end-of-year press conference which Vladimir Putin holds every year. This has not taken place. So I think that shows a certain amount of lack of confidence, I think, in the Russian leadership about the current situation. Obviously, I mean, Russia is nowhere near where it wanted to be at this stage. If we look at the flip side of this, of what we've just said about Zelenskyy being in Washington, the flip side of that is that Vladimir Putin would have wanted this war to be long since finished when he embarked upon it back in February. Now what we see on the Russian side is they've launched this mobilization. They're trying to regroup and potentially, and the Ukrainians have been warning about this, launch a fresh offensive in perhaps January, perhaps February, perhaps March next year. And it seems that all of the energy is going into that.
Ines, Zelenskyy is going to go before a joint session of Congress in a few hours, especially looking at the continued support for the Ukrainian defense effort. How important is that?
Yeah, very important. Just as Richard pointed out, you know, the United States is at a crossroads to a certain extent. Why is that? Because the majority in Congress is changing in the first week of January, and the majority leader will be much more critical with the support of Ukraine. So are many of the rather right-leaning new Congress members. So he's not only addressing Congress in a joint meeting, he also is planning to have many bilateral talks, because this is really also something kind of about an emotional approach. He has to convince people by explaining the situation, and I think he started doing that in the Oval Office by talking about this visit at the front line, by talking about this military leader and the cross he gave President Biden. So he really has to convince some of these critics to ensure the continuing support of the United States, as we just heard, the country which is so crucial for Ukraine to continue fighting the war against Russia.
Yeah, we're actually seeing
or Russians
that,
invasion, I should say.
Yeah. We just saw that scene that you were talking about where Zelensky handed Biden that medal that he was handed in Bakhmut. One of those bilateral meetings that you were talking about will be between Zelensky and GOP leader Kevin McCarthy. He is the one who said that there should be no more blank checks for Ukraine. That sounds like it will be a very uncomfortable conversation, doesn't it, Ines?
Yes, it will be very uncomfortable, and it will be also difficult because we are also slowly kind of going into the next presidential elections. They are 2 years away, but the Republicans are getting ready. You know, the Republicans' possible candidates after former President Donald Trump has announced that he's running again. Other potential candidates are getting ready, and they are already testing the waters when it comes to the support of Ukraine. For example, the Florida governor, he's very critical. He made some remarks that maybe one should dial back a little bit regarding the support of Ukraine and spending all these billions of dollars, and asking the question if it wouldn't be better to invest them in the own country. So the big fear here really is that this support is being more and more politicized over the next months and maybe years to come. So this is the big task for Volodymyr Zelenskyy today in these bilateral talks, but also in addressing Congress, you know, to convince people that this is not only a fight for his own country, but this is a fight for democracy, and it will be hard to win without the continuing support of the United States.
Yeah, and one of the points he was making was that this was not only a Ukrainian cause, that this was also in the interest of the United States to keep supporting Ukraine. If you're just joining us now here on DW News, we are looking at pictures of the White House where Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the president of Ukraine, and U.S. President Joe Biden are due to hold a press conference briefly while we wait for them to show up. Though I want to ask you, Richard, Joe Biden expressed his support for a just peace. Can that be interpreted as a promise of support until Russia is defeated?
Yeah, well, I think we can't be sure exactly how to interpret that. And it will be interesting to see if one of the assembled journalists there really asks a question of Biden about, you know, what he sees as a potential end to this war, because I think this is a really interesting part of what Zelensky's mission is here, you know, to shore up this support in terms of, you know, keeping those weapons flowing, but also to try to make sure that he feels the US is on side in terms of, like, what is a way in which this war can be ended justly. Yeah. And you see periodically, and there's another phase of this at the moment, of voices in Europe, but also partly in the United States, saying, OK, maybe it's time to think about, you know, diplomacy with Russia, trying to find a negotiated end to the war, a ceasefire, and then a negotiated end. The Ukrainians are very wary about that because they say, well, what's that going to do? It's going to kind of freeze the conflict in its current situation, potentially with you know, everybody saying, all right, well, then wherever the border is now, wherever the front is now, kind of settle things down on that level, and then give a year or two for the Russians to rearm and then mount another invasion. And from the Ukrainian point of view, the war that we've seen this year is simply a rekindling of a frozen conflict from back in 2014 when the Russians annexed Crimea and began eating into eastern Ukraine. So the Ukrainians really want support to keep fighting. They don't want to be dragged to the negotiating table now. And the Ukrainians say that they want all of Ukraine's internationally recognized sovereign territory back. That includes all of eastern Ukraine, all of the bits that have been nibbled away at this year by the Russians, plus Crimea, which was annexed back in 2014. And this is where, you know, you start to see some potential divisions opening up with the West, where they're wary of saying, OK, you know, trying to take back Crimea from the Russians, that could really, like, bring Putin to, or draw Putin into using even more kind of desperate measures, potentially even to the point of nuclear weapons. So I think it'll be really interesting to watch what does Biden say about this. about what his kind of imagined vision for a just peace is.
Yeah.
What does he actually mean by that?
Yeah. We're about 2 minutes away from the press conference starting. I'm being told, Ines, do you expect any major announcements to come out of this meeting?
Well, I think the biggest take really will be, and we talked about that earlier, like this symbol, like really that these two leaders are standing together. President Biden will repeat his support for Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Volodymyr Zelenskyy will thank the American people again, and probably also will talk a little bit about his own country and the need. President Biden said that earlier in the Oval Office. Vladimir Putin is also using winter as a weapon. It's getting really cold in Ukraine, and so much of the infrastructure is destroyed. So I think that's what the two leaders will focus on, and then they definitely will also be talking about the air defense system, the Patriot missiles, and how important they are. And we shall see if some journalists who are in the room will address the big question: what is a just ending of this, a just peace of this conflict. So definitely it's going to be interesting to follow this press conference, and also later today Volodymyr Zelenskyy's address to Congress, because he, I'm sure, will repeat some of the things he's saying here, but probably using a little bit more of a personal approach to convince, by the end of the day, the lawmakers to stick with him and his fellow Ukrainians.
Ines, I'm going to have to interrupt you there, because we're just seeing Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Biden taking the stage.
President Zelenskyy, I'm honored to welcome you back to the White House. We spent an awful lot of time on the telephone as well as on video, but it's good to see you in person again. And we've been in close and frequent communication throughout this conflict from the very beginning, but particularly, it's particularly meaningful to talk with one another in person, look each other in the eye, because leadership through this terrible crisis has inspired the Ukrainian people, as you have done, Mr. President, and the American people and the entire world. This visit to Washington, your first trip outside Ukraine since February, comes as President Putin is escalating his attacks, his brutal attacks, targeting critical infrastructure to make life as hard as possible for not only innocent Ukrainians, but children and young children, and everything from orphanages to schools. It's just outrageous what he's doing. And we've, as we've heard, as we head into the new year, it's important for the American people and for the world to hear directly from you, Mr. President, about Ukraine's fight and the need to continue to stand together through 2023. This visit also falls on the 300-day mark of Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. 300 days since Putin launched an unprovoked, unjustified, all-out assault on the free people of Ukraine. 300 days of Ukrainian people showing Russia and the world their steel backbone, their love of country, and their unbreakable determination, and I emphasize unbreakable determination, to choose their own path. To Ukrainian people, I say to them all, you have demonstrated, you have shown your strong stand against aggression in the face of the imperial appetites of autocrats who wrongfully believe they might be able to make might right, and they're not able to do it. Thus far, they've stood alone, you know, and but you haven't stood alone. You have had significant help. We've never stand alone. You will never stand alone. When Ukraine's freedom was threatened, the American people, like generations of Americans before us, did not hesitate. The support from all across this country, Americans of every walk of life, Democrats and Republicans alike, had the resources and to rebound and resounding united way to provide unequivocal and unbending support for Ukraine. Because we understand in our bones that Ukraine's fight is part of something much bigger. The American people know that if we stand by in the face of such blatant attacks on liberty and democracy and the core principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, the world would surely face worse consequences. And as I said, when Putin rolled his tanks into Ukraine in February, American people are prepared to have us stand up to bullies, stand up for freedom. That's who we are as Americans, and that's exactly what we've done. Even before the invasion began and Putin threatened Ukraine by building up his forces, we helped make sure Ukraine would be prepared to defend itself, even before they crossed into Ukraine. We provided a steady stream of defensive weapons, including air defense systems and artillery, ammunition, and so much more. And we've not done it alone. From the very beginning, the United States rallied allies and partners from around the world to stand strong with Ukraine and impose unprecedented, and I emphasize unprecedented, sanctions and export controls on Russia, making it harder for the Kremlin to wage this brutal war. More than 50 nations have committed nearly 2,000 tanks and other armored vehicles, more than 800 artillery systems, more than 2 million rounds of artillery ammunition, and more than 50 advanced multiple rocket launching systems, anti-ship and air defense systems, all to strengthen Ukraine. Together, we provided billions of dollars in direct budgetary support to make sure the Ukrainian government can keep providing basic fundamental services to the Iranian people, like health care, education, and emergency personnel. This includes another $2 billion that in direct budget support from the American people that the World Bank distributed earlier this week. We provided humanitarian assistance to help the millions of Ukrainians who have been forced to flee their homes because of Putin's inhumane, brutal war. Communities across Europe have opened their hearts and their homes to help Ukrainians in need. The United States has been proud to welcome more than 221,000 Ukrainians seeking refuge since March of 2022, including as part of Uniting for Ukraine, as part of our Uniting for Ukraine program. And today, USAID is committing more than $374 million in urgently needed humanitarian assistance for Ukraine. This will help provide food and cash assistance for more than 1.5 million Ukrainian people, as well as access to health care, safe drinking water, and help stay warm in the winter for more than 2.5 million Ukrainians. The United States and our allies and partners around the world have delivered a broad range of assistance at historic speed and has been critical to bolstering Ukraine's success thus far. Ukraine has won the Battle of Kyiv, has won the Battle of Kherson, has won the Battle of Kharkiv. Ukraine has defied Russia's expectations at every single turn. And President Zelenskyy, you have made it clear that he is open to pursuing, well, let me put it this way. He's not open, but you're open to pursuing peace. You're open to pursuing a just peace. We also know that Putin has no intention of stopping this cruel war. And the United States is committed to ensuring that the brave Ukrainian people can continue to defend their country against Russian aggressions as long as it takes. And I want to thank the members of Congress for their broad bipartisan support to Ukraine. And I look forward to signing the omnibus bill soon, which includes $45 billion in additional funding for Ukraine. I'll also sign into law the National Defense Authorization Act, which includes authorities to make it easier for the Department of Defense to procure critical munitions and defense materials for Ukraine and other key materials to strengthen our national security. Today, I'm announcing the next tranche of our security assistance to Ukraine. $1.85 billion package of security assistance that includes both direct transfers of equipment that Ukraine needs, as well as contracts to supply ammunition Ukraine will need in the months ahead for its artillery, its tanks, and its rocket launchers. Critically, in addition to these new capabilities, like precision aerial munitions, the package will include a Patriot missile battery, which will train Ukrainian forces to operate as part of the ongoing effort to help bolster Ukraine's air defense. This could take some time to complete the necessary training, but the Patriot battery will be another critical asset for Ukraine as it defends itself against Russian aggression. Altogether, today's new security assistance with humanitarian funding amounts to $2.2 billion in additional support for the Ukrainian people. We should be clear about what Russia's doing. It is purposefully attacking Ukraine's critical infrastructure, destroying the systems to provide heat and light to the Ukrainian people during the coldest, darkest part of the year. Russia is using winter as a weapon, freezing people, starving people, cutting them off from one another. It's the latest example of the outrageous atrocities the Russian forces are committing against innocent Ukrainian civilians, children, and their families. And the United States is working together with our allies and partners to provide critical equipment to help Ukraine make emergency repairs to their power transmission systems and strengthen the stability of Ukraine's grid in the face of Russia's targeted attacks. We're also working to hold Russia accountable, including efforts in Congress that will make it easier to seek justice for Russia's war crimes in Ukraine. Let me close with this. Tonight is the fourth night of Hanukkah, a time when Jewish people around the world, President Zelenskyy and many of the families among them, honor the timeless miracle of a small band of warriors fighting for their values and their freedom against a much larger foe, and how they endured and how they overcame. How the flame of faith, with only enough oil for one day, burned brightly for 8 days. A story of survival and resilience that reminds us that the coldest days of the year, that light will always prevail over darkness, and hope drives away despair. And that the human spirit is unconquerable as long as there are good people willing to do what is right. This year has brought so much needless suffering and loss to the Ukrainian people. But I want you to know, President Zelenskyy, I want you to know that all the people of Ukraine to know as well. The American people have been with you every step of the way, and we will stay with you. We will stay with you for as long as it takes. What you're doing, what you've achieved, it matters not just to Ukraine, but to the entire world. And together, I have no doubt we'll keep the flame of liberty burning bright, and the light will remain and prevail over the darkness. Thank you for being here, Mr. President. We're going to stand with you.
Thank you. Шановний пане президент.
Dear Mr. President, please put on the equipment. Once again, Mr. President, President Biden, audience, journalists, ladies and gentlemen, I came here to the United States to forward the word of thanks to the people of America, people who do so much for Ukraine. I am thankful for all of this. This visit to the United States became really a historic one for our relations with the United States and the American leadership. In the last 30 days of this war, we have started a new phase of our interrelations with the United States. We became a real partners and allies with the content. And I felt today during all of my meetings and during our talks. Once again, I would like to thank Mr. President Biden, for his candid support and what is very important, the understanding of Ukraine, and for the support of the international coalition to strengthen international law. I am grateful to President Biden for his personal efforts, his steps that unite the partners and and global South. When all countries of the world take some position and are focusing on cooperation and mutual understanding, this is very useful for all of the countries, for Ukraine, for the United States. I want to thank the Congress for bipartisan, bicameral support, and I am looking forward to good meetings with the members of the Congress and their support. This is the visit that I'm here today to meet with the Congress. The main issue during my today's talks is to strengthen Ukraine. Next year, our movement forward to fight for our freedom and independence. I have good news returning home. President Biden announced a new package of defense support about $2 billion, and the strongest element of this package is the Patriot battery systems, something that will strengthen our air defense significantly. This is a very important step to create a secure airspace for Ukraine, and that's the only way we would be able to deprive the terrorist country and their terror attack to strike our energy sector, our people, and our infrastructure. We had a very good negotiation and talks about our strategic steps, which we discussed with President Biden, and what we expect next year and for what we are preparing. This is very important for all Ukrainians, and I am hopeful. And once again, thank you, Mr. President, for $45 billion, because this is a big assistance, and I hope that the Congress will approve this financial assistance for our country. This is almost $45 billion. Thank you very much for the support. Every dollar of this investment for the United States is going to be strengthening of global security. I know that the American leadership will be strong and will play an important role in global scope. And the United States will help us to defend our values and independence. And regardless of changes in the Congress, I believe that there will be bipartisan and bicameral support. And I know that everybody works for this. And of course, during all of my meetings today, we discussed issues of standoff against terror of Russia, the destruction of our energy infrastructure. We need to survive this winter. We need to protect our people, and we need to be very specific in this area. This is a key humanitarian issue for us right now. This is the survival issue. We are discussing sanctions and legal pressure on the terrorist country, Russia. Russia needs to be held accountable for everything it does against us, against our people, against Europe and the whole free world. And it is very important that we have the peace formula, and for that we offer very specific steps what America can do to help us to implement them. We propose global formula for peace summit. I'm thankful for our American counterparts that they feel us and understand how important it is to continue and stay on course and work on integrity of the country and international rule of law. We will also need, as soon as our defense capabilities will be strengthened in the next few months, I don't want to discuss it in details right now. I believe you understand why, but I am very grateful to President Biden. Thank you for your attention to all of these issues. Glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We're going to take questions from 4 different reporters, and let's start with Alex of Yahoo News.
Thank you, Mr. President. In 2022, you presided over a bipartisan international coalition to support Ukraine. How will you keep that coalition from fraying in 2023? And President Zelenskyy, welcome to Washington on this beautiful winter day. What is your message to the American people?
Well, answering your questions first, I'm not at all worried about holding the alliance.
Наше союзницьке партнерство з країнами Європейського Союзу і іншими країнами.
I assume this is simultaneous. All right. Okay. I've never seen NATO or the EU more united about anything at all. And I see no sign of there being any change. We all know what's at stake here. Our European partners, all the more so. They fully understand it. This is about, we've never seen a major invasion of a European country since World War II. And they see no signs that Putin is going to do anything to change that unless we resist and we help the Ukrainians resist. We all know what's at stake, the very idea of sovereignty, the UN Charter. Putin thought he would weaken NATO. Instead, he strengthened NATO. I once said to him that we talk about he wanted to see Europe end up being divided. And instead, what did he do? He produced a more united Europe with Sweden and Finland joining. So I don't see any reason to believe there'll be any lessening of support. And as we reach out to our NATO allies, our Secretary of Defense and our Secretary of State, we get continued support, not only there, but also from around the world, from Japan and many other countries as well. So I feel very good about the solidarity of support for Ukraine.
Thank you for your question. Thank you very much. You asked me what is the message to
Дякую за
American people.
запитання.
I think I will tell you very simple things, which are very important for me. And I think so that we have the same values and the same understanding of the life, the sense of the life. My message, I wish you peace. I think that is the main thing, and you understand it only when the war in your country, when somebody like these terrorists from Russia come to your houses. And I wish you to see your children alive and adult. And I wish you to see your children when they will go to universities and to see their children. I think that is the main thing, what I can wish you. And of course, to be together with us, jointly, because we really fight for our common victory against this tyranny. That is real life. And we will win. And I really want win together. Thanks so much. Not want, sorry, I'm sure.
You call on one of your people, press person?
Yeah. Будь ласка. Канал Інтер.
Yeah, thank you. Dmitry Anopchenko, Ukrainian television. President Zelensky, President Biden, I got a question to both of you, but firstly, as Ukrainian, and I mean it, I want to thank the United States for supporting my country. And, you know, my family is in Ukraine, and I definitely understand they will not be alive today if America will not support my country, both politically and militarily. So thank you for this. It's honest.
We will.
And as of my question, we enter a new phase of this war, and you definitely discussed today which path to choose, how the war could come to an end, and what's next. Will it turn into a new counteroffensive or some kind of peace talks? So, Mr. Biden, Mr. Zelensky, could you share your vision? What's the fair way to end this war, and how do you understand this word, fair peace? Thank you.
My view.
Your guy.
I think we have. I see.
Although I like him very much already.
Ви розпочали це запитання.
You have started this question.
I'm sorry. Sometimes I switch on my native language. Ви почали з того, що ви
You have
сказали.
started by stating that your family is in Kiev and without the assistance of the United States. This is absolutely true. The U.S. leadership in this assistance is strong. And again, yeah, I would like to remind you that your family will be in danger without the armed forces of Ukraine, which is very important. That concerns your questions per se. What would you like to hear? Just peace? I don't know. I don't know what just peace is. It's a very philosophical description. If there is a just war, I don't know. You know, for all of us, peace, just peace is different. For me, as a president, just peace is no compromises as to the sovereignty, freedom, and territorial integrity of my country, the payback for all the damages inflicted by Russian aggression. I'm sorry I'm I'm talking about children a lot today, but as a father, I would like to emphasize, you know, how many parents lost their sons and daughters on the front lines. So what is just peace for them? Money is nothing, and no compensations or reparations are of no consequence. They live by revenge. I think this is a tremendous tragedy, and the longer the war lasts, the longer this aggression lasts, there will be more parents who live for the sake of vengeance or revenge. And I know a lot of people like that. So there can't be any just peace in the war that was imposed on us by these, I don't know how to describe that because we are in the White House and I can't find the proper language. So these inhumans, I would say.
Let me respond. I think we share the exact same vision. And that a free, independent, prosperous, and secure Ukraine is the vision. We both want this war to end. We both want it to end. And as I've said, it could end today if Putin had any dignity at all and did the right thing and just said, pulled out. But that's not going to happen. Not going to happen. It's not going to happen now. So what comes next? What we talked about today was we're going to continue to help Ukraine succeed on the battlefield. It can succeed in the battlefield with our help and the help of our European allies and others. So that if and when President Zelenskyy is ready to talk with the Russians, he will be able to succeed as well because he will have won on the battlefield. And, you know, I don't think we should underestimate the impact this war is having on Russia and the losses they're suffering. And you saw just, I think it was 2 days ago, Putin saying that this is much tougher than he thought. He thought he could break NATO. He thought he could break the West. He thought he could break the alliance. He thought he could be welcomed by the Ukrainian people that were Russian-speaking. He was wrong, wrong, and wrong. He continues to be wrong. The sooner he makes it clear that he cannot possibly win this war, that's when the time we have to put this president in a position to be able to decide how he wants the war to end. My turn, huh?
Please, yeah.
Phil Matterly, Matt Matterly of CNN.
Thank you, Mr. President. Welcome, Mr. President. Mr. President, to start with you, your advisors often talk about how critically important you view face-to-face interaction. I'm wondering, after spending 2+ hours face-to-face with President Zelenskyy, what you learned or what you took from the meeting that perhaps you couldn't glean or learn in the phone calls or video conferences, and somewhat tied to that, was there any discussion related to the U.S. assessment that Russia would not take escalatory action now that Patriots are being sent, a Patriot battery will be delivered?
Let me answer the first question, the first part of your question. You know I get kidded for saying that there's all politics is personal. It's all about looking someone in the eye, and I mean it sincerely. I don't think there's any substitute for sitting down face to face with a friend or a foe and looking them in the eye. And that's exactly what's happening at this moment. We've done that more than once, and we're going to continue to do it. And the winter is setting in, and Putin is increasingly going after civilian targets and women and children, orphanages. This guy is, well, but he's going to fail. And he's going to fail. He's already failed because he now knows that there's no way he's ever going to occupy all of Ukraine. There's no way in which he's going to be accepted by the Ukrainian people. And so he's failed in the past, and it was very important for him and everyone else to see that President Zelenskyy and I are united, two countries together, to make sure he cannot succeed. And I think I may be mistaken, but I know I judge every leader by the way what they say to me, their consistency, and look him in the eye. This guy has to his very soul is who he says he is. It's clear who he is. He's willing to give his life for his country, and all the folks that came with him today. And so I think it's important for him to know we are going to do everything in our power to see that he succeeds.
Thanks.
What was the second part of your question?
I just asked if you had discussed how the U.S. calculated the escalatory effect of sending a Patriot missile battery to Ukraine.
I did not discuss that at all with the president, but we do not. It's a defensive system. It's a defensive weapon system. It's not escalatory. It's defensive, and it's easy to not. And we'd love to not have to have them use it. Just stop the attacks.
President Zelenskyy, again, welcome. You mentioned earlier that you wanted to make this trip for a while now. Why now? And also, can you tell me what you think the message you are sending to President Putin is, given the fact that 24 hours ago you were on the ground in the front lines with artillery echoing behind you, and now you find yourself in the White House standing next to the president?
Thank you very much for your question. As to what is the message for Putin? I am standing here in the United States with President Biden on the same podium because I respect him as a person, as a president, as a human being for his position. And for me, this is a historic moment. I can send messages to President Biden. For example, if it's not serious, you said, what's going to happen after Patriots are installed? After that, we will send another signal to President Biden that we would like to get more Patriots.
We're working.
That is our life. We are in war. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. That is my appreciation. Що стосується президента Путіна.
President Putin. In 2019, we had a Normandy meeting. In 2019, I became the president of Ukraine, and at that time, we were sending maximum messages to President Putin, telling him that there shouldn't be a full-scale invasion, to stop aggression, to renew our territorial integrity, to find diplomatic solution. Or, God forbid, we should not have a full-scale war. At that time, he said, it won't happen. He was lying. So what kind of message I can send him after he actually destroyed our life, is destroying our life? He can even go further, somewhere where the Soviet Union stayed before this, so he might want to invade those territories too. I believe that there is something mortal about his inadequate approach to the world. Why we need to send him a message? He needs to be interested in getting attention from the world, because he is not a subject of civilized people. He should be interested in trying to save something of his culture and history of his country. So that's his problem now.
This will be the last question. Olga Koshelenko, 1+1 TV channel. When the full-scale invasion started, U.S. officials said that Ukraine cannot receive Patriots because, as you said, it might be unnecessary escalation. And now it is happening. Right now, today, it is happening. And now Ukraine desperately needs more capabilities, including long-range missiles, ATACMS. Maybe I sound naive, but can we make a long story short and give Ukraine all capabilities it needs and liberate all territories rather sooner than later? Thank you.
Well, his answer is yes.
I agree.
Let me be straightforward with you here. Look, the fact is that it's important to remember that before Russia invaded, we dedicated an enormous amount of security assistance to Ukraine. And we've given Ukraine what they needed when they needed to defend themselves. And since the invasion, that has resulted in more than $20 billion in terms of security assistance. Just today, I approved another $1.8 billion in additional assistance to Ukraine for it to succeed on the battlefield. And we're focused on working with allies and partners to generate capability in 4 key areas. Air defense, as we know today, the Patriot is the best of that. Secondly is to, and we're looking to do more, we provided hundreds of advanced artillery systems and from dozens of countries. Thirdly, we've worked with partners to get Ukraine tanks and other armored vehicles. And fourthly, we've announced today another 200,000 rounds of additional ammunition. Now you say, why don't we just give Ukraine everything there is to give? Well, for 2 reasons. One, there's an entire alliance that is critical to stay with Ukraine. And the idea that we would give Ukraine material that is fundamentally different than is already going there would have a prospect of breaking up NATO and breaking up the European Union and the rest of the world. We're going to give Ukraine what it needs to be able to defend itself, to be able to succeed and succeed in the battlefield. And the other piece of this is, you may recall, one of the reasons why I have spent, well, I won't tell you the calculation, but I've spent several hundred hours face-to-face with our European allies and the heads of state of those countries and making the case as to why it was overwhelming in their interest that they continue to support Ukraine. They understand it fully, but they're not looking to go to war with Russia. They're not looking for a third world war. And I think they can all be avoided by making sure that Ukraine is able to succeed in the battlefield. So anyway, there's more to say, but I probably already said too much. Thank you. Well, thank you all very, very much. Appreciate your time and attention. And as I said, Mr. President, you don't have to worry. We are staying with Ukraine as long as Ukraine is there. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. All the best.
Ladies and gentlemen, please.
Now, if you're just joining us, you're watching DW News special coverage of Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to the United States. It's Zelensky's first trip abroad since Russia launched its war. In the White House, Joe Biden said it was meaningful to talk and look each other in the eye. He promised Ukraine would never stand alone and expressed admiration for what he called Ukrainians' steel backbone, love of country, and unbreakable determination. Zelensky expressed his gratitude for the bipartisan support for his country and made an emotional plea for it to continue until his country was no longer under attack. And I am joined here in the studio by Richard Walker and in Washington, D.C. by our Washington Bureau Chief, Ines Pohl. Ines, Biden seemed very taken with Zelensky. What are your takeaways?
Well, it was really underlining how closely the United States stand with Ukraine. President Biden said a couple of times, we are here for you as long as you need us. They had a very easy way with each other, and given the dire situation in Ukraine, it was quite surprising that there was even some laughing in the room. What for me stood out is also that Joe Biden kind of went back in history saying that is what we Americans do. We help countries in need. We help countries which are threatened by authoritarian or even terrorist regimes. And he did that to kind of already reach out to those who are much more critical with the support of Ukraine. And the other thing which stood out for me, and I attended quite some press conferences in the White House, I've hardly ever seen a foreign leader who is so knowledgeable about the internal conflicts in the United States. The way President Zelenskyy addressed the problems with bipartisan support in Congress, that was quite remarkable.
Yeah. Richard, what are your impressions of what you heard, especially when it comes to military assistance?
Yeah, so I certainly agree with what Ina said, and it was striking. I mean, some of the quite sort of emotive things that Biden said about Zelenskyy. That when you talk to another politician, you look them in the eye, and this guy is who he says he is. He's willing to give his life for his country, really holding Zelenskyy up as the kind of heroic leader that he's now increasingly seen as. These moments of kind of joviality, which it is very striking in the situation that there was laughter in the room on a couple of occasions. But there are a couple of areas where you see differences between what they're saying. One of the areas was actually one of these lines that actually got the laugh, the last question, where a Ukrainian journalist said, for the longest time you said you couldn't give us Patriot missiles because that's going to cause escalation. Now you give us the Patriots. We also want these long-range missiles. Why can't you just cut a story short and just give them to us? And Zelenskyy said, Biden said, Zelensky's answer is yes. This caused a bit of laughter. What was Biden's answer? Well, Biden started rattling off this kind of long speech about all of the 4 different areas in which they provide support. So really trying to sort of fob off a little bit with the other elements of support that they offer. And ultimately, essentially, sort of implicitly blamed it on the Europeans, saying that, we have to hold the whole alliance together, you risk the breakup of NATO and the EU, and implying that it's the Europeans who are worried about providing kind of longer-range missiles, that they think that Putin would overreact to that. And also, then in a minute, maybe we can also talk about what they said about their vision for how the war might end, because if you look carefully, there were also some differences there.
Biden said he supported a just peace, and when asked about it, Zelenskyy said there could basically be no just peace in an unjust war. So where do they stand on that front?
Yeah, so Zelenskyy was specific. So he said, for me, a just peace is no compromises on sovereignty, on freedom, on territory and integrity. For him, that means, as we were saying just earlier in the show, that means he wants everything that the Russians are occupying to be given back. So that means in eastern Ukraine, where the fighting is taking place now, also Crimea, which was annexed way back in 2014. Joe Biden said at the beginning, he said, well, we share the exact same vision, but Biden's version of this vision is blurry and vague. Yeah, he says a free, independent, prosperous Ukraine. He didn't say anything about, full territorial integrity, any of the specifics that Zelenskyy said. But what he did also say is OK, well, what do we do for now? He said, well, for now, we help Ukraine to make progress on the battlefield, and said that so that Zelenskyy himself can decide at which point he then wants to go into talks. But Biden not being drawn into this really specific position that Russia has to give back everything.
Yeah. Ines, we don't have much time, but I do want to ask you about Zelensky's next stop, because he's going to be speaking in front of a joint session of Congress. What can we expect there?
Yeah, he will basically try to reach out to those who are not in strong support for Ukraine and try to ensure that the money also is coming next year. That was in the core of his approach in the press conference and early on in the Oval Office, because this is the big challenge here in the United States. What will happen if the majority in Congress is changing and more rather hardcore right-leaning lawmakers will be in control, who are very critical with the approach, spending so many billions of dollars to Ukraine, saying, hey, we have so many problems in our own country, let's really take America first. So this
I'm more precise than you. I'm stronger, faster, more efficient.